All right, we are back for episode 2 of the Squad 44 map making tutorial series. Today, we're going to be going over everything to do with the landscape. So, this is going to include splines, sculpting the terrain, and painting the terrain. Now, before we do anything with that, we're looking here at the map we set up in the last tutorial, Chef DuPont, and we have our decal here. One thing I didn't cover was how to turn this decal on and off. So the very first thing we want to do whenever we are going to work on a map is make sure we set our geo as our current. We don't want to start adding stuff in the persistent level, so let's make sure we set that to current. And then in my world outliner, I'm going to search for decal, and there's decal actor. And if I want to be able to find this easier in the future, what I can actually do here is right click on my level here and create a folder, except this is actually, yeah, it should work. We're going to create a folder and we're going to call this decal. And then if I search for my decal, I can pop that into that folder. Now that'll always be at the top for me. So if we want to just turn this decal on and off while we're working, we can hit this eye icon right here so we can see what we're doing. Although when we get to the part where we can actually play in editor, where we can actually run around on the map, if we have this eye off, you'll still see the decal in game. So you can also check and uncheck this visible box to turn it on and off. And this will actually make sure it's not there when you play in editor. So this might be better practice. So for now, we'll go ahead and turn that off. And let's get in a little closer to our map here. So as we get in close, we can see that our grass looks kind of weird. And that's because we never set up a landscape renderer. So the landscape render is a newer thing in the game. It wasn't always there, but it's there now. And it makes the landscape look better. I'm sure it's a more performant way of doing things. I don't know exactly what it does, but I think it essentially takes the color of the ground underneath to determine the color of certain things on top. And I think one of those things is this 3D grass. Another thing will be certain road splines and things like that. I could be wrong with how that works, but I think that's how it works. So to set up the landscape renderer, we're going to come in here. We're going to make sure we're in our content folder, and we're going to do a quick search, BPA underscore landscape did I misspell something? Landscape render. Okay. So I didn't type it out fully. I just started. We're going to want the BPA landscape render simplified. You can also use the landscape render not simplified. Just more of the maps in the game, almost all of them, use this. So it probably makes sense that actually, you're seeing a bunch of modded maps. Here we go. Let's see more. Vanilla maps, you're probably going to want to use what most of the vanilla maps use just to be safe. So we are simply going to take that, drag it into our map, doesn't really matter where, and make sure you're in the details pane over here. If you're in world settings, just come over to details, have that landscape render selected, and now we need to set up a few things here. So the first thing, we need to assign what landscape this is rendering. You should only have one landscape on your map. There might be certain reasons why you'd want multiple, but that's very, very uncommon, and most of you will just have one landscape. So you're going to select that landscape, and now we have to set up some things. So we need the landscape size, and if you remember in the first tutorial, we set up the landscape to be about 5 by 5 kilometers. So we're going to go to 5 kilometers, this 5101 by 5101 right here. And we're going to make sure that the bounds origin is set to 0, 0, 0. The should override location box, I believe, should be checked, and I think the location needs to be 0010,000. We'll see if that works. It might be 1,000. And then we want to uncheck this box for the override landscape bounds. So then the first thing we're going to do is grab landscape bounds. And then the next thing we're going to do is create depth texture. And now when we do that, we can already see things popped in to look normal. Like the grass looks like the grass should look like now. So that means we did something right here. But we don't know where this got created. If I hover over this, we can see this got put in game postscriptum maps landscape renderer, which is a vanilla folder. We don't want that in a vanilla folder. We need this asset to cook with our mod, which means it needs to be in our mod folder. So I'm going to click on this content browser here. I'm going to hit this magnifying glass, and it's going to bring me right to the folder where it exists. And then over here, I'm going to open up our mod folder, and we'll just drop the depth texture right in there, and we're going to move that. All right. And then sometimes you'll update something. In this case, the 3D grass just disappeared, so this probably won't fix this issue. I'll show you how to fix that in a second if it doesn't. But at various times when you're editing things on the map, you may need to update this, and all you're going to do is click Render Landscape. Typically, when you open the map for the first time of the day, you will need to first come in here and click Render Landscape as like one of the first things you do just to make everything look great. So now that's the landscape renderer set up. So that's nice. I'm going to show you real quick how to get your 3D grass to appear if it ever disappears like this, which for me, it always happens if I delete something. The 3D grass disappears. I guess for some reason it also happened when I move this texture. So you're just going to come up to the modes, go to landscape, go to paint, and then just paint anything anywhere, and just click it once, and then 3D grass renders. It might not render everywhere. You can just click another spot. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So as I said at the beginning of this tutorial, we are not going to be importing a height map. We are going to be hand sculpting the elevation on this map. So I think that's what we'll start with first, is sculpting out the general height of the terrain. So first, we can see all this red stuff that we may not want to see. Remember, press G and that'll go away. There's no reason for us to really see that right now. However, I probably do want my decal visible. So if right here it's grayed out. That's because I'm in the landscape mode. I need to come to the select mode. Let's make that decal visible. So if you have access to some kind of height map, like not like a height map that you import, but a map that shows contour lines, that would be preferable for this. That's what I had for the map I'm currently working on. I did not look one up for this, but Normandy's fairly flat, and the map I'm working on is also a Normandy, and the max terrain elevation difference was about 30 meters. So I'm going to aim for something similar here. The high parts of the map, probably 30 meters compared to the lowest points at 0 meters. And what we can see on this decal is we can kind of see where the lowest land is. Like this line and everything to the left of it is going to be your lowland. And this will be higher elevation. We can imagine like the city or the town, it's not really a city, might be a bit higher. And we can kind of get creative with it. Again, if you had a map with contour lines, you might want to use that, but just for the purposes of this tutorial, we'll do it this way. So we've got our map decal here. We're going to come over to the landscape. Again, I can press G sometimes you have to hit it twice to get rid of that stuff. And we're going to go over to the Sculpt tool. Now, when we use the Sculpt tool, we can do a couple different things with it. So first we have the strength of our tool, and right now we have sculpt height data selected. So we have the strength. I will say you will almost never want this at full 1 strength. 1 strength is crazy. Let me just show you an example. If I just change this to a 1000 radius and I sculpt with 1 strength, it goes up really high, really fast. There's not a lot of context for how high this is. That's probably about the height of like 2 or 3 people standing on top of each other. So when I'm sculpting, I'm very rarely doing a strength of 1. I'm just going to undo that. But if we're doing large swaths of landscape, we also don't want to have a super low strength and have to do the whole map like that. So what we can do is we can do... Sorry, I was working in the Company of Heroes editor, which does this a little bit differently. But we can do flatten here. And I believe if we do flatten target and we type a value in... Yeah, so that would be a 10-meter height difference there. Not sure why this grid is appearing. We'll ignore that for now. And I can just, well, actually, let me undo that because I did that in the low ground. But I can do a 10-meter difference and kind of start painting along the contours here. And now 10 meters is a lot. And maybe for this map, I'll actually only do 20 meters total difference. We'll see. But we are going to eventually smooth this out. It's on a map like in a Normandy setting, we probably don't want too many sharp, steep, tall cliffs like this. Maybe you do on whatever map you're working on, but we won't for this. So I'll show you how to smooth out that in a little bit. But for now, I'm just going to draw this around where my lowland is going to be. I'm going to have to start getting a little creative around this part. It's a little less clear. So maybe we'll come up like this. And I should go to the edge of the terrain, not just to the edge of the decal, just so it's consistent. We can see maybe over here, it's also higher elevation. We could also go into Google Earth, or if you have something like Project 44 that I showed on the last stream, you can go and on those you can get right down and see the actual 3D landscape, or you can use Street View. Or again, if you have a map with contour lines, you can do something like that. But for now, we're just going to eyeball it just for the sake of the tutorial, keep things timely. And we will just fill all of this in. Unfortunately, you can't make your brush any bigger than this, at least that I know of. And then we'll come over here. This will take a little bit more. I might speed this up or cut it out in the actual video. We'll see how much I feel like actually editing it. Also, if anyone has any recommendations for music that I can play in the background that won't get my video muted, DMC8 or whatever, Might be nice to listen to some music while we do this instead of just hearing my voice drone on and on. But maybe I'll take the Bob Ross approach and try to use a smooth, calming voice as we paint the landscape. To make a beautiful map where we can kill each other. I don't know how much longer I'm going to use this map for the tutorial. Once we get kind of all the basics set out on this map, I might switch over to the map that I'm currently working on, St. Combin du Mont. Just because there'll be a lot more examples there, and I can also kind of get some stuff done while I'm doing the tutorial. But all of this stuff is already done on the map, so it doesn't make sense to use that for this part of the tutorial series. And then if anyone wanted to continue making this map, Chef DuPont, just let me know in the comments and I'll send you the map. Or if there are a bunch of people that comment that they want to do it, maybe, I don't know, we'll do some kind of giveaway or something. Maybe you can all collaborate, work on it together. We'll see. All right, we're just about done painting in the 10-meter area. Now, let's put this up to 20 meters. And what parts do we think maybe should be higher elevation? Oftentimes, the landscape will show you where that stuff is. So if we look here, there's kind of this strip. This actually might be lower land by the looks of it. So maybe we don't want to do that. Oh, we can see some spots I missed here. That's okay. We'll get that later. Honestly, I don't worry too much about stuff like this because when we end up smoothing all this out, I think this kind of makes nice little terrain features. Because obviously we're not going to want everything to be flat like this, so we'll get to that in a little bit. So I'm going to say maybe this town and like these spots, I don't know, maybe are a little higher elevation. So maybe pick this part of the town. And we'll follow a contour line like this or something. We'll do the same over here. Maybe that's just slightly higher elevation there. Another 10 meters. And we'll paint all this in. Yeah, this is the value of using a flattened target instead of like a tool strength. And then, because if we just did tool strength, it's going to flatten it at whatever height we first clicked on, like I showed a little bit in the last tutorial. And when we get to painting, painting also has target values you can use so you can get the right blend of things. Something I don't use super often, but it does definitely have its uses. And when you need to use it, it's definitely nice to actually use it than try to make it work without using it. That's our 20-meter spots. Do we want any other 20-meter height spots? Maybe we'll do We'll do this spot over here. Why not? I'm kind of using this road as like a buffer. We will probably want to decide if that road is higher or lower elevation. Um, Actually, no, maybe we'll make it right on the slope. That would be good for part of the tutorial to show you how to do certain stuff. Yeah, maybe we'll keep it at something like that. We'll keep that as our general height map here. I think that would be good. So now what we're going to do, we're going to save. We always want to make sure we save periodically. Go ahead and save those. There were changes to the offensive layer, probably because we added a folder, which I think is technically in the layer. I don't know. We'll see. But generally, if I'm only working on the geo, I might question why it was also changing the persistent level. But now we're going to go ahead and we're going to turn the decal off. And now we can see our landscape here. We can see I left a lot of holes, but that's okay. So we're going to come back to the landscape tool, press G twice to get rid of that. Go over to sculpt. And now instead of flatten target, I'm just going to leave it here. I'm probably, I'm probably not going to use the actual flatten tool very much here. But what I am going to do, I'm going to take this strength down to 0.2. I'm going to leave this really big for now. And I'm going to just paint in, 0.2 was too much. We'll try 0.1. And I just want to paint in stuff. Let's make the landscape a little more interesting. This will create kind of rolling hills and stuff, just so it's not completely flat. You can do it everywhere. You don't want to move your mouse too quick when you do it, because it'll kind of like skip around and it won't be continuous. It won't be like a nice continuous line like you see here. If you do it too fast on a big area, it can't keep up like you just saw there, and it just kind of skips around, and then you get like these circles that appear. So you can't do it too quick. I like to go over it multiple times sometimes. And we'll just do this pretty much throughout the whole map. One thing we'll have to keep in mind, though, for the lowland is, was this part of Normandy flooded? Was this lowland completely or partially flooded? Because if it was, we want to be careful with what sculpting we do down there. I personally think it would look nice if we did some more sculpting, even if it was flooded. So maybe we will actually come in and just edit the terrain to be nice and different. But yeah, we're just coming in here and just adding all kinds of variation in here. And it might not look like much now, but once you start detailing the map more, it's going to really make this kind of look like nice rolling hills and not be just completely flat like the chapter 1 maps, which, to be fair, the Netherlands is just pretty flat. But maybe Colmar is a little unnecessarily flat. And then maybe at the end of this tutorial, this episode, I might load up the map I'm working on to show kind of what this stuff will actually look like when it's more finished. So you can kind of see the process and then the finished product. I think that might be useful. Here I'm probably going a little too fast. You can see I'm starting to get individual circles. All we're doing is just messing up the terrain. And this is something I try to do as one of the first things on my map. I don't want to start placing buildings and placing roads and stuff only for it to get all messed up by me completely changing the elevation. This is one of the very first things I like to do. And that's probably enough for now. We can always come back and add more after we smooth some of this out. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to take the smooth tool, and first we're going to smooth drastic things like this, and we're going to want to increase that to maybe 0.2. Maybe even 0.3. There we go. So we're going to start smoothing stuff like this out so it appears more natural when we're actually running through here on the map. By the way, how this tool works, you can just hold left click, I believe, and it should keep smoothing. But in the Company of Heroes editor, you have to like kind of keep moving it around. That's why I do that. I think it still works without moving it around in here, but I feel like it also just gets a little bit more variation, especially when you're using the sculpting part of the tool, not the smooth part. Although, maybe I'm completely wrong. Maybe it's just all in my head, but that's how I like to do it. So that's how I'm going to do it. And like I said, if you're doing something maybe more in the like Ardennes area, maybe you don't want to smooth all this out as much. Maybe you do want some more harsh slopes, and then you're going to put rocks and stuff on there and really kind of show like the elevated nature of that area. But for a Normandy map, we want nice like rolling kind of hills, and we don't want super steep elevation changes. I could also increase the tensity, the strength a little bit of the tool here, but I don't want to completely erase the change in elevation either. That's why I'm keeping it at 0.3. Maybe I could just put it up a little to 0.4 and I won't have to circle around each spot so much, but sometimes patience is key. So I'll keep the lower strength here. We can start to see how these start to look like nice rolling hills here. What's nice about sculpting your own landscape is you can also dictate more about how your map is going to play, because one thing I will say is we're using a map decal to kind of get an idea for the map, and we do want the map to represent Chef DuPont in some capacity, right? But making a map completely one-to-one is, in my opinion, almost always not a good idea. Just because real life isn't made for good gameplay. And at the end of the day, we want our maps to be fun for gameplay. And that should be priority over the map looking like the real area. With that being said, for the most part, like your main roads, your main like towns and all that, like there's no reason you can't have that and still have good gameplay. So we will be putting the roads where the roads should be. We'll probably put all the hedges where the hedges should be, at least for the most part. We'll probably put all the buildings where the buildings should be. Maybe we'll add or subtract a few of our own for gameplay when we start detailing each area. But we shouldn't be too concerned with, you know, oh, there was a little shed here, there was this fence here, there was this tree here. That kind of detail, first, it's going to drive you crazy trying to make a map that one-to-one, because we tried that when we made our Nijmegen map. We tried going like one-to-one to that detail, and it is a nightmare just to work on it like that. But also, you end up with areas that are not necessarily fun gameplay. You might certainly have a bunch of areas that are still fun for gameplay just by doing it one-to-one. But what you want to do is look at what you're doing and make sure that that area is going to be fun for gameplay. You don't want to just leave it up to chance. So by sculpting our own terrain here, we can make sure we have nice rolling hills so we can break up sight lines. I mean, long sight lines can definitely be fun, especially if you're making a map more for realism events than vanilla game. But you also have to keep in mind the limited render distance in the game. At some point, we're probably going to put a cold distance volume on the map, just because that is the standard for Postscriptum or Squad44. Maybe we won't give it the exact same settings as all the vanilla maps, because I do think some of the vanilla maps have the cold distance volume much harsher than it needs to be for that map. And what we're going to do is we're going to look at our sight lines and kind of determine the cold distance volume based on that. But even though we can edit the cold distance volume, by the way, is a volume you put on the map like a giant cube, and you set at what distance objects just completely disappear or cull and are no longer rendered, which is a huge save on performance, but obviously has gameplay implications. So even though we can set that so buildings might appear further than they do on a normal vanilla map and stuff like that, the actual soldiers and vehicles, you're not going to change unless you make all your own soldiers and vehicles. So we still need to keep in mind sight lines. And it's why some maps like in the Ardennes are difficult to make. Like if anyone's played the map Simon Skull, that can be a difficult map to make an event on or to play in pubs because you can see for so long across that valley. Makes it a really hard challenge for a mapper to make something like that everything still renders properly. So we can draw our own hills to make sure there are areas maybe on top of this hill where you have some nice sight lines. But as long as we have enough other rolling hills, maybe we're going to add a bunch of hedgerows. We will definitely add a bunch of hedgerows. We can make sure that even though maybe you can see 300-400 meters, you're not going to be able to see past like 600 meters where soldiers wouldn't render anymore. So that's kind of a more high level thing that we need to keep in mind as we're doing this. But I think for now, everything's smoothed enough. We can come back later, smooth or sculpt certain areas as we need. But the big thing now is these areas here where the vast majority of the elevation changes. So for this, we could just, I'll actually do an example. We could just use the smooth tool on this. We can even up that intensity, really get the smooth tool going over here. We can even put this full intensity, really smooth this out, right? And that does do the trick, right? We do have a smoothed area here. The only we got kind of lucky that there was an elevated hump here from when I was drawing other things. But the only potential downside to doing it just with the smooth tool is if you were to do this whole thing with the smooth tool, you don't get a whole lot of variation, right? It's just a smooth slope going up. There's no like steeper parts, shallower parts. So there's nothing wrong with doing it this way, but I do think it can be better if you kind of sculpt it a little bit more by hand. So we're going to take our sculpt tool and set it to sculpt. I'm going to do 0.2 strength. Probably going to bring this radius down a bit. And I'm just going to pick some areas to kind of sculpt along here, where once I smooth this, it's going to create different intensities of slope. Like here, it'll probably be a more steep slope because I'm not going to do full strength on the smooth. But here, where it kind of has slightly higher ground, it's now going to be a gradual slope as it goes to that ground, then to this ground. Just going to change it up a little. So that's what I'm going to do. What I can also do is do a little bit like here, and I can get out my flatten tool. I don't have the flatten target on anymore. And I can just grab here and just flatten this out so I can make a whole area with kind of like another shelf sort of. So you can do that if you want. And I'm just going to go along this whole area here, kind of doing this sort of thing. Can also, if I instead want to make an area that maybe cuts in and does the elevation that way, if that makes sense, I'll come over here. And if you hold shift with the sculpt tool, you'll actually paint down. So you can see I made a little hole there instead of bringing the landscape up. So you can do that as well. Bring the landscape down there so you can have a more gradual slope that way. Even maybe bring it up over here at the same time. We'll kind of do this sort of thing throughout. It could be a good idea to have the decal open while we do this if you want to do certain areas that kind of align with different parts of the terrain or whatever. For right now, I'm just going to do it just to show you what you can do. And then the creative license is all yours when you're working on your own map to do it how you think it should be done. But this is kind of the technique for how you would do it. And this might take some trial and error to get it to look the way you want, but it will get there. And you might need to do some fine tuning on specific areas once you get your map decal up, or once you start actually painting in roads and stuff. You might realize, whoa, this is way too steep for a road. You can also use splines to help you with that specific problem, which I'll show. But this gets the general idea down. And I like this because then we still have our clear areas. Like this is still clearly the lowland. This is we have our higher elevations and our highest elevations. But the transitions between these are now going to seem much smoother. And they won't be like, oh, they clearly made a high area, a low area. It'll hopefully seem pretty natural. So that's probably good for the sculpting. I'm going to bring the smooth tool back out. I'm going to make the radius big as I can. And I think I'll do a 0.4 strength on the smoothing here. And we'll start smoothing this out. Really going to get the areas where I didn't like draw in additional sculpting transition. Try to make sure it's not a harsh drop off. Again, if you are using a height map, you won't need to do this as much as I did here, but the height maps, when they import, aren't always perfect. You might still want to do some of this sculpting that I'm doing. Hopefully your major like kind of shelves of different terrain are imported properly at the height map, but it might not have like the micro details that we were doing. So I would suggest, even if you are importing a height map, you take a look at the terrain before you just start adding things. Make sure it looks the way you want it to look. And we'll just keep smoothing this up. Now, once we're all done smoothing this, we'll take another look. We might need to further refine certain areas. So we'll have to see. Do you think I'm going to up the strength on this to 0.5? While I'm doing this, I'll also explain on the left side, you see at the bottom of brush settings, there's an option called brush fall off. And if you look at my cursor, my reticle there where I'm actually smoothing, you'll see there's two circles. There's an inner circle and outer circle, and there's kind of that white glow. The fall off is between those two circles, and that white glow kind of shows the intensity. So it gradually transitions in between those two circles, and the brush fall off at 0.5 means one circle will be half the size of the other. I could change that fall off to a different number, and then you can see my inner circle got smaller. So now it would be more of a feathered approach. And if I make this really small, now there's going to not be a lot of feathering. So you can also use that, especially when you're using something like the flatten tool. Like maybe if I had done a much larger feather with the edges of my flatten tool, I wouldn't have to smooth so much right now. So maybe something to consider. I never tried actually doing the main landscape sculpting that way. It's very rare that I change the brush fall off, because I feel like 0.5 usually does a good job, but maybe I'm missing out on something. Maybe I should be using that setting more. I'm going to increase the strength again to 0.7. Really want to get this stuff smoothed out. I might need to come in here and sculpt certain specific areas again to get it a little smoother. You get the general idea here, at least, I hope. Smooth this stuff out more. Yeah, something like this, I might need to actually use the sculpt tool a little more, but for now I'm going to leave it. I think smoothing that stuff out more is something that I'll leave to when I'm detailing an area a bit more. Maybe once I have my roads painted in, I can see how that stuff feels. And then we'll come over here. I think for this, just for time's sake, I'm going to do one strength, just really get this stuff smoothed out. Because I don't think you guys need to see me do this whole thing to get the idea of what you're supposed to do. I will really smooth this quickly. All right, now we've pretty much got that all smoothed out. We still have this area to do, so let me do that really quickly here. Oop. And we will smooth again. We'll do it at full strength just for time's sake. I have to blow my nose. Sorry about that. All right. Come back in here. Continue smoothing. Just gonna get some of these outliers that are particularly sharp. this one is like kind of really bad actually. This one I might just actually sculpt it back down a little to help out with the smoothing. All right, we have everything kind of sorted out now. I feel like some of this is maybe a bit hilly. So something I could have done, which I'm just realizing it's something I did do when I was making my other map, is come to sculpt, flatten. So I did that flatten target at 10 meters, 20 meters. I think what I did along the edges was, like this is a 10-meter one, was also did halfway up to help make this smoother. So you can see that's 10, that's 5, and this is 0. And now if I were to come in and smooth, that would help a lot. So bit of a mistake for me there, not doing that this time. But you get the idea, hopefully. So this is a very hilly landscape now, but at least you can see the techniques that you need to use. Hopefully, well, it should be okay. I'll probably have to smooth out some areas as we detail, but we'll get there. All right, now that's your basic sculpting. Like I said, we'll want to go through and fine-tune certain areas as we go. But we're going to now turn the decal back on. And what we're going to do now is start drawing in our roads. So typically when I'm drawing my roads, I like to establish a main road width and a kind of secondary road width. Where the main roads will be a little bit wider, the secondary roads will be a bit narrower. So if we look here, we actually have a railroad going through the map, which is pretty cool, pretty nice feature. So we might start with the railroad, and I'm going to show a few different things, and I will start doing that with the railroad. I'll start down here. So I could go to landscape, go to paint, and try to get here a suitable width. It's like a decently wide rail bed here. Let's just say 700 is what we wanted, and I want this to be a gravel rail bed. I could come in here and paint, which if I turn the decal off, you can see now I've started painting that in. And I could do that for the railroad, for all the roads, and there's really nothing wrong with that. But there is a better way, in my opinion, and that's using splines. So what we're going to do, we're going to start with this railroad, and we're going to go to landscape, manage splines, and I'm going to start down here just because we're going to imagine the continuation of this railroad down here. And I'm going to hold control and left click, and that makes this thing appear here. So control left click makes that appear. I think the half width I might keep at 1,000 because 700 did seem still a little bit narrow for that rail bed. So we'll try that. And we're just going to draw a spline by control left clicking as we go. So I'm just holding control and I keep pressing left click. And now we're going to follow this railroad. Now what we want to do, since we drew quite a bit of elevation change in here, if we do long segments between the railroad, our railroad is going to kind of cut through or elevate the terrain based on where we are. Like right here, it's kind of steep. But if we do shorter, it's going to follow the terrain better. Because if I were doing long segments, and let's say I put a segment here, and then the next one I put is here, it's not going to know about all this terrain elevation change in between. But if I do shorter ones, if I put one here, 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 now it's going to conform to the landscape a bit better. Psst. Sorry, my cat. Psst. All right. So we're going to come through. We're going to do them decently far apart, but not too far, because we don't want it to completely ignore the elevation. But at the same time, it is a railroad, so we can't have crazy elevation changes. And we're just going to keep control left clicking for this railroad the entire way down the map. All right, so we've got that for the railroad. Now, oftentimes these rail beds are elevated off the ground a little. I don't know how that's going to be inside the town here, but we're going to do it just so I can show you. What we're going to do is we're going to click control points. That selects all the control points on the spline. And I'm actually going to click this one first, then do control points. So my gizmo is right here. And we're going to elevate this whole spline above the terrain slightly. Maybe about that much. This is actually crazy. Oh, actually, this is a good time to show this. So I feel like this is too steep a hill for the railroad, right? This is just not very realistic for a railroad. So I'm going to come to the sculpt tool over here. And I'm actually going to flatten, I think. Just kind of cut that right through. And then I'm going to kind of come up halfway and then flatten. Oop, that didn't work. Go a little more. No. Well, there we go. I got to come up a lot more to flatten like that. And I'm just going to try to sculpt this out a little so it's not such a huge change in elevation. Wait, did I have my flat? That's why I had my flattened target on still. Oops. That would explain it. Let me come back. Do this again. I'm going to flatten this all. We'll come here and smooth this part out. Maybe sculpt this a bit down here so we can smooth this. Be a more gradual slope kind of thing. Take the flatten tool. And all we're doing here is trying to just have a more realistic slope grading for our railroad. I'm just flattening and smoothing and flattening and smoothing. All right. So that's probably good for that. But now if we come over to our spline is no longer conforming to the terrain. So one thing that's nice about Unreal Editor is we're going to click all the control points. We're going to hit control points. We got them all selected. We're just going to make sure they're all above the landscape. And if we hit end on our keyboard, END end, it snaps them right to the terrain. This also works for any actors you place on the map. So like all your static mesh actors, your houses and whatnot, you can raise them up and then just hit end and they snap to the ground. It works better with some assets than others. Like if you did that with houses, your doorways are going to be up in the air. It's going to be the very bottom of the foundation of the house that snaps to the terrain. So it doesn't work perfectly with that, but it'll work great for like boxes and wagons and that kind of thing. And in this case, splines. So now our spline is once again conforming to the terrain, and we're just going to raise it above slightly to kind of get that elevated rail bed feel. And then once we've done that, we're going to go to segments, and now we can type in a layer name here. So there's a few things we can do. I'm going to actually come in here quick and turn the decal off so we can see what's happening. So with splines, the splines are a very versatile tool. They can do things like walls, like I explained in the last tutorial, where if I were to put a wall mesh here, it would have a nice wall that's continuous and it follows the curves and the contours of the terrain. Very nice. That's also what we're going to do with our rail tracks. But what we can also do is sculpt and paint the terrain. So first, I'm going to click segments. I'm going to not type anything in layer name just yet. I'm just going to hit this button only selected. So deform landscape to spline only selected. So if I click that, it's going to take the segments I have selected and the spline I have selected, and it deforms the terrain right to the landscape. And we can see this green strip is where it actually got deformed fully. And then if we look at our control points, we can see side fall off is 1,000. That side fall off is the distance between the green strip and this green dotted line. And we can see that that's where the the landscape deformation transition occurs. So if we wanted less of a slope here, we could make the side fall off. So we could undo what we just did. We could change this side fall off to like 200. We can see that dotted line comes in, and then we select segments, only selected, and now it's a much steeper slope. So this can be very useful if you're making, like if there's sort of like a cliff or a wall where you need the terrain to have a sharper drop off, you can do something like this. We don't want a sharp drop off like that. I think the initial value of 1,000 seemed pretty good. So we'll leave it at that. But I don't want just grass where my railroad is, right? So I want gravel. And now I know you have to use these names. So if I want gravel, I have to make sure I actually type gravel. If I want field, I have to type field. If I want dirt B, I have to type dirt B. I can't, like the name has to match exactly. So if I come to my spline here, I select segments, layer name, and I type gravel. When I hit only selected now, it painted the gravel texture everywhere along this spline. So that's super useful for many, many things, including railroads and roads. So we got that down. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this spline. I'm going to take all the segments and I'm going to add a spline mesh. So to do that, you make sure you click segments, landscape spline meshes. I'm going to hit this little plus. That's going to have this little 0 index with a drop down. And now I have things I can do here. So there's a spot to assign an actual mesh. There's center horizontally, center adjust. Most of the time, you're just going to want to keep that the way it is, but maybe you want something offset. I have never needed to use that. Scale to width is a big one. So if we're doing something like railroad tracks, we do not want to scale this to the width of the spline. We want the railroad track to be whatever size the railroad track should be. But when we're doing something like roads, we might want to scale it to width so we can have wider roads, narrower roads, stuff like that. So for here, I'm going to uncheck scale to width. And the only other thing you might need to mess with sometimes is forward axis. If you try to put a spline and instead of it's a wall, instead of the wall being nice and continuous, if the wall is facing like perpendicular and you just have a whole bunch of walls facing like not connected, you might need to change the forward axis to be Y instead of X. But for now, we are going to come in here, turn on static mesh. I think they call them tracks in the game. Let's see. Of course, there's all these tank tracks. Okay, here we go. Yeah, they are called tracks. So there are two here. There's one actually in the postscriptum folder. This one's not. I'm going to choose to use the one in the postscriptum folder. And all I'm going to do is drag and drop that right into where that mesh option is. Oh, this is a great example. So here, my railroad is not the way it should look. They're all facing the wrong way. So this is when I'd want to come to forward axis and instead of X, choose Y. And now it orients it the right way. And now maybe also, I feel like this almost looks like it's floating on top, like it's barely touching the ground. I could come in here, go to control points, and bring that down just slightly there if I wanted to, which I think I'm going to do. And then I don't want just one track, right? I'm going to bring this over to the side, let it think. I'm going to hold Alt and drag. Oop, it didn't work. Sorry, it doesn't work that way for splines when you have them all selected. I'm going to come to segments and I'm going to hit Control C for copy. Then I'm going to hit Control V to paste. Now I'm going to hit control points. Let me just select that, control points, and drag it off to the side. Now I can have two tracks coming down here. I don't know how many tracks were actually here. If you're doing this, I would recommend measuring it out a bit first, because this is a bit wide for two tracks. But if it was three tracks, it's probably a good size for the rail bed. So for that reason, I am going to just make this 3 tracks. But again, if it was only 2 and that was going to bother me, I would just probably make this rail bed a bit more narrow. And now we've got, now we've got our railroad. Again, it's not perfect. I just did it real quick just to show you how splines work. But there you go. We have our railroad going through the center of the map. And yeah. Next, I'm going to show you, I'll do a road or two just to show you how you can do things with roads. Then maybe I'll do some walls. Then we'll get to some landscape painting. So we're going to come up here, turn our decal back on. and we need to figure out width of our roads. So looks like this is pretty clearly a main road going through the main town, and it looks like maybe this and this are main road. That might be it for like real main roads. Maybe this one's a main road. But it's really up to us what we want a main road to be. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to come back to landscape, go back to spline, and I'm going to just, well, I guess I'll start on the edge of the map. I'm going to hold control, left click. I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to come part way down this road here. And I'm going to select all control points, and first I'm going to see if I can get this to match the width of this road decently, which maybe 400. It's maybe a little narrow. 450. 450 seems like it matches okay, but for doing road width, I would not rely solely on matching your aerial photography or your hand-drawn map, whatever you have. This, I would very strongly recommend you get a vehicle to test with. So if I type Opal here, we have some Opal Blitz Rex. So this, let me come over to select. This is what an Opal truck would look like on your road. You can see there's plenty of room for 2 Opal trucks to pass, and then some extra room, which is maybe good for like a highway. These Normandy roads feel pretty claustrophobic in general, so I don't really want it to feel that spacious. I'm actually gonna just put another one side, but like I feel like 2 trucks should have to be almost touching to get past here. So we're gonna try to replicate that kind of feel. So I'm gonna grab this and probably something like 300. Yeah, 300 should be good. I can maybe go a little narrower, but I think 300 for a main road and then maybe a little narrower for not a main road would be okay. Maybe even go a little wider since we will have narrower roads. So yeah, main road at 350 probably feels okay. I do know I am going to want to change the side fall off at some point because, well, I'll leave it for now and then I'll try to demonstrate it. So I'm going to click back on this specific control point since it's the last one on my spline, and I'm going to continue drawing my spline. Now with this road, I do want the control points to be fairly close together so it follows the contours of the terrain pretty well. But we are also going to be sculpting the terrain with the spline. So if there are any spots like here, you can see the spline is underneath the ground a little. When I do this only selected thing, it is going to make it conform to the spline, which is nice. And then in future tutorial videos, or maybe I'll like live stream one day or something, I do want to show, I'm actually going to stop the road here because there would be like a bridge or something here, and I don't want to do a spline over that. But in future ones, I do want to show like how I do things on my map when I'm like not rushing, so you can see like actual good technique. This is more just how to actually use the tools. But yeah, so we have our road here. We're going to come over to segments. I am going to want this to be dirt underneath. Dirt is kind of like a sandy dirt with this landscape material we have. And, ooh, the mesh. Actually, let me turn this decal off real quick. So the first thing, if we just have this dirt do only selected, actually the fall off might be okay. You can see the kind of transition here. Now something that's weird is it didn't get rid of all the grass. So for some reason the 3D grass isn't updating properly. There should be no 3D grass there. Wonder why that is. That happened to me once before. I had to close the SDK and restart. But maybe there's another fix. Oh yeah, see the 3D grass is just floating here. So something's wrong with the 3D grass. There was a console command. Shoot, I don't have it anymore. There is a console command you can look up for Unreal Editor to manually update the grass. I don't know if I want to look that up. Maybe I do. Let's see if I can find it quick. All right, let's see if this works. That was really easy. Grass dot flush cache. There we go. All right, easy enough. So now our 3D grass is updated. There you go. If you ever need to do that, grass.flush cache. So now we have our road here. You can see there are going to be some spots where we need to smooth that out more. Again, like when I show the map I'm actually working on, we'll be a little more careful with this stuff. But you get the idea. But we don't just want our road to be a dirt texture. And actually, yeah, I guess I'll leave it that texture. That's fine. It's autosave. That's fine. We haven't saved in a really long time, so probably good we have an autosave here. Next thing I need to do is come over to the spline here and add a spline mesh. And I hope I find the right thing because I've just been copying and pasting so much from my map once I found the road. This is like, you're going to find half the things you need like once, and then you're just going to copy it from somewhere else on your map, and then you're never going to remember what the thing is called. So bear with me for a second here. Because for years in the SDK, we had these terrible road meshes, which is all of what I'm scrolling through here. And then Mercury Arts came in. I think it was Mercury Arts that added it. It could have been Periscope in its dying days. Who knows? They added these nice road meshes that like blend with the landscape underneath. Okay. Landscape blend, dirt road landscape blend. I think we want something like that. Let me just scroll up and make sure. Yeah, dirt road landscape blend. We'll try that, see how it looks. We're going to add that in here. We want it to scale to width. This, I don't think that's the right one, but we'll know for sure. When we first put this here, it's not going to look right, obviously. But if we come over to our landscape renderer and we render our landscape, okay, so it does update, and that's not terrible, but that's not what I want the road to look like. But it is the right concept at least, so we got that. I'm going to come here and we're going to try a different one. Dirt road landscape blend. Oh, maybe it's just this one. Ah, that's the one. So it's just dirt underscore road underscore landscape blend. And if I right click and browse to or show in folder view, this is the folder for it. So now we have our road. One thing I will point out is you kind of see you have this weird like grainy stuff on the side. I figured out that it's because this road is like just slightly higher than it should be. So if you grab all the control points, and now when I move these control points, I like holding shift because that gives you like finer detail control. And I just bring it down slightly. Now at this level, you can still clearly see the tracks and everything, and you don't have that weird grainy thing, which is really nice. But here you can see maybe the fall off was a bit too much. Like, do I want this much extra dirt on the road? I'm not so sure I do, but we're just going to leave it like that for now. You can mess with the side fall off as you need to. But yeah, there's a road. And now let's say we want along this road, we're going to add another spline. And I'm just going to pick a half width that is not obnoxiously large, just so the control points aren't obnoxiously large. I'm going to draw along the side of the road because I'm going to add a wall or a fence or something. And let's just say it's there. It's going to be the same concept. I draw my spline. I go to segments. I'm going to add a spline mesh. I'm going to hit this drop down. I do not want my wall to scale to width, whereas the road I did have it scale to width. And I'm going to come up here and I'm just going to search wall. And we can choose, I don't want to say any wall. There are some walls that are not very compatible to splines. Like you're going to try to place it and there's going to be gaps between the walls. But sure, maybe I want this one with the little fence on top. We're going to add that in. And that's easy as that. We've got our little wall there. Some splines work better with curves than others. And I'll demonstrate that real quick here. Maybe I just want a fence here for some reason. So I'm going to have this curve. I'm going to add a mesh. If I add, let's see. If I add like this wall, let me uncheck scale to width. Actually, I'm going to show you first what this looks like. Yeah, if you don't uncheck scale to width, that's what happens. And then you'd have to adjust the width of this to get it to the right size, is how that would work. But that's a lot of work when you could just uncheck that box and it makes it the right size. So like this kind of spline works pretty well with curves, right? You got a stone wall, it curves, that's great. But what it doesn't work well with is wooden fences. And maybe there's a way in the game, in the engine somehow, to make this not happen. If there is, I don't know of that way. And like the Company of Heroes editor, it doesn't do this. It's got smarter logic for this particular thing, I guess. Yeah, we're going to add this fence here. And, you know, you have a nice wooden fence and it curves. But what's not nice is the wood itself actually bends. Like you can see that the point about which the turn is made is less so where the pole is and more just the middle. So I don't know if it's just the way the mesh is set up or if there's a way to change this, but it would be nice if the bends happened where the poles were. So you do have to be careful using splines with like wooden fences and stuff that you don't have just wood bending on your fence. So just something to keep in mind there. And if you ever want to delete a spline, you just select all the control points, hit delete. It's going to ask if you want to join the segments. I'm actually going to hit cancel because let me just cancel through all of them. If I just wanted to delete one. Like maybe I'm like, oh, I don't want this bend. I'm just going to delete this control point. Do I want to join the two segments? I can hit yes, and now these are joined. Or maybe I want to delete this, or not that one. If I want to delete this because I want to put a crater here, like this fence blew up. Now I can delete this and hit no, and now I've just made it, granted a large, but a hole in my fence. So you can delete segments that way, or you can select all of them, hit delete, and it doesn't matter what you hit because you're deleting all of them anyway. So some things with splines there. And I think that's, for the most part, everything with splines. I'm sure there's something I forgot, but that is definitely enough to get you mapping for sure. You've seen the sculpt tool, and now we're going to go over the paint tool. So actually what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to maybe make a little farm around this area where I put a wall. So we'll try to be relatively quick with this. Let me actually go through the folders here. Environment, we'll go to day of days, buildings, farmhouse, and we'll put something like this. It'll just do something like that. That'll get the job done. We're going to come over to the landscape here. We're going to delete this segment. And we'll get these things a little bit closer here. Have a little entryway. And maybe I'll also come over here, select this, come over here and get a pole for the edges of my fence here, just to make this look nice. Shrink that down a little, put that in the ground. All right, so we have our little farm. You know what? Every good farm. Oh, I'm not going. I forgot. We're not doing foliage today. Sorry. Not going to do that part. So we have our little farm here, and I want to paint my landscape in here. Let me, first, we don't want it that wide. We want probably about 200 is what I usually use. And we're going to paint this with, let's say, field. And first thing, everywhere in your house is going to have grass by default. You want to make sure your strength is 1, and you're just going to paint all under the house to get rid of that grass. We'll also need to flatten this so we can see the landscapes coming through here. So again, we're just going to paint all under the house here. All right. Next, let's flatten this real quick, just so there's no landscape peeking through. Then we'll want to smooth this out the back. All right, so what I want to do is pretty much wherever there's a door or something like a door, like these stairs, kind of want to have some kind of path. Do I still have this on 200? I do. So 200 is kind of like the sweet spot for me because some of the 3D grass still comes up. And you're going to draw your paths here. Try to have them connect, I think is nice. Gonna have this come out here, connect this up, maybe connect that up. And you can connect it. So that's like painting in its very basic form. Maybe these people have like a little paved area here, which you'd probably not just want to have it meet the other ground here. It's probably good to have like a wall or something. So maybe we're just going to add a wall here to kind of show that they have like a little paved porch area or something. Probably bring that down a little. So yeah, we can just add this real quick. Just to kind of justify. Okay, I guess I was going to cover this in a different video, but we have this, it's called Z fighting, where there are two objects the same height. The engine doesn't know which material it should display on top. Whenever this happens, come to your location on the Z axis, and in the hundredths place, so that's 2 decimal points over, you're going to want to change this by 3 in one direction. I do 3 because it's enough where the Z fighting stops, but it's not so much where you notice that they're at separate heights. So right now it's 0.47. I'm going to change that by 3 to 0.44. And now it didn't look like there was any visible height change, but the Z fighting stops. That's a little tip for you there. So now we've got our little wall there. Come back in, oops, the grass. Make sure that the pavement isn't outside the grass. Maybe we'll put another wall here, so there's a clear end to the pavement. We'll come back with field. And there we go. Now we've got a couple different paints in here. But right now I'm doing everything with 100%, right? So maybe out the back here, you know, they're coming out here a lot and they're walking into their field. Maybe I have this field a little bit better defined, let's say. And one thing that's kind of nice is, in my opinion, if you draw some like subtle detail in here. So I'm going to change the strength to 0.2. I'm going to really go around this part a lot where they're walking a lot because they're just coming out of their little barn there. But now I'm going to start doing longer stretches here where you're not going to notice it very much when you play, but it's going to be a nice little detail, in my opinion, kind of showing that this area is maybe a little bit more well traversed. I'm just really going to bring this out here. So what we can see is, like, as you're walking through, you still see the grass, but you just see a little bit more dirt peeking through as you're walking through. It's just a nice little change, a little bit of variation. I also, sorry, it's selected weird. I also think it's nice to use this for forest. Like if I had a big oak tree here or something, I'd probably come with forest here at 0.2 strength and just kind of draw it in, because what it does, I don't know why the grass broke again. Guess I'll open the console and, oh, there it goes. Okay, never mind. We will close the console maybe. Okay. So if I paint it very lightly, you still mostly see the grass, but now you see some leaves coming through because I used the forest here. So if I keep painting here, the forest will get darker and darker. And maybe I want that around my oak tree, but maybe I know I only want this at like 0.3. I can just paint this all here. It'll come in at 0.3 strength. So it's still mostly grass, but with some leaves. And I can change this target value to whatever I think looks right. So can use the target value here just like we did with the sculpt tool. And just imagine there's a tree there, which I'll show in the next tutorial. But I think that's pretty much everything with landscape. We set up our landscape renderer. We've sculpted our terrain. We learned how to use splines. We learned how to paint and deform terrain with splines. We painted some oh my god, yeah, this needs to be smoothed. Yeah, I did this pretty rough, this sculpting here. I wonder, let me see how long I've been recording for. If I can justify, how long have I been recording for? Does this not tell me? Oh, an hour and a half? All right, real quick. We'll see if I can load this quick. Oh shoot, you know what we didn't do? We didn't save this. Save that first. It's probably important. All right, now we'll open St. Coma Dumont just because I feel like that sculpting was so bad. I need to show you what it should look like. And then we'll end the tutorial. I'm actually going to record the ending audio now in case this takes too long. So that is potentially the end of the tutorial. Thank you for watching. That's episode 2. In the next episode, I think we're going to cover foliage and procedural foliage. And that shouldn't take too long, so maybe I'll think of a third thing to add, or maybe I'll just go over some more technique. And I actually think I will end the video here rather than waiting for this to load. So I'll probably show you St. Coma Dumont next time so you can see what I've been working on. But that's it for this one. Thanks for watching and happy mapping.